Why, for 36 years I've put up with it now. I must stop Grinch movies from coming. But how? So, yeah, I'm going to talk about the Grinch, but before I do, I'm going to make a real quick note. It's got absolutely nothing to do with the rest of this video, but I feel like I want to do a quick additional acknowledgement. Yesterday, we lost Stan Lee. I'm not going to dedicate a video to that because I don't feel like I can do the man justice, and I think the post I put in the community page for this channel says about as much as I am capable of saying, and I will miss him, and he brought a lot of joy through a lot of what he did, both in writing and in just as a person. So moving on to something that did not bring me nearly as much joy as Stan Lee did. The Minions People's The Grinch. No, I'm not going to call it Dr. Seuss's The Grinch, even though that's the official title, because this is not Dr. Seuss's The Grinch. It's just like I refuse to call Jim Carrey's How the Grinch Stole Christmas Dr. Seuss's How the Grinch Stole Christmas, because it's not. Now, before I get into this and get too much into complaining, because yes, that is largely what I'm going to be doing, allow me to start with a major acknowledgement. I saw this with my daughter. She's actually the reason I saw this. Left to my own devices, I would not have gone to see this movie. But, so here's the first big thing. If you have kids, young kids, my daughter's 7, they will probably like this. In fact, they'll probably love it. I actually asked her, this is her favorite version of The Grinch. She's seen all 3. She likes this best, then the Chuck Jones short version, and then the live action last. So, yeah. If you have young kids, the people who this movie is actually made for, they will probably love this. However, if you're like me and you grew up on, I'm sorry, a much better version of this, or if you grew up on the book, yeah. It's not as bad as the live action version for a number of reasons. First of all, it doesn't have the weird sort of creepy Uncanny Valley thing with the design of the Who's going on that the live action version had. So that's point one. And it doesn't make quite all of the same mistakes. There was particularly one major mistake that the live action one made that this one does not. And that was in the live action version, basically making everybody kind of awful. Like, the only decent human being was Cindy Lou in the live action version. Like, the Who's were all terrible people. And so, like, what is the basic concept of How the Grinch Stole Christmas? The Who's get the value of Christmas, the Grinch doesn't. And the live action version decided, no, the Who's don't get it either, which was weird and dumb. Now, this doesn't do that. However, it does still make most of the other mistakes that the live action version made, including, and that largely comes down to how they chose to pad it out. Because this is the fundamental problem with basically every single feature-length Dr. Seuss adaptation there is. Dr. Seuss's books are exactly as long as they need to be. They are incredibly economical. They'll be like maybe 1 or 2 more pages or more flourishy paragraphs than there needs to be, but strictly speaking, they do what they need to do, and once the job is done, they're over. And what the things that you have to add to that, to pad it out, to get feature length, they never help. Because ultimately, Dr. Seuss stories aren't really about the narrative. When you think of Dr. Seuss, you think about the turns of phrase and the images and the flow of the poetry. You don't necessarily think about the substance of the story. That's not to say that there was no substance in Doctor Who. There absolutely was, but it was thematic. It was about messages. It wasn't about this happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened, which is part of why they go so badly with padding them out, because there's no fat on these stories, and adding fat in doesn't it doesn't help. So you just end up with these things with these really weird and bizarre additions, like one of the things this does, which the live action version did too, which is to give the Grinch backstory and a reason for not liking Christmas. Now, while again, I will grant it is neither as drawn out nor as stupid as what was in the live action version, it's still infuriating to me that it's there. Especially considering, and this is probably my single biggest gripe about the movie, the narration done by Pharrell Williams, I think. So he, I'm used to just calling him by the name he puts out music. So, first of all due respect to the guy, he's not a great narrator. His voice does not work for this very well at all. So, but even setting that aside, about 90% of the things he say are not from the story. That's not inherently a problem, but we need to make a law where if you're not Dr. Seuss, don't try to write Dr. Seuss. And I'm not even talking about adapting. I'm like, don't try and write his poetry. Like, if you're doing a flat out spoof, that's one thing. Don't try and actually recreate what he did in his voice. 'Cause you can't. Nobody can. And the fact that almost all the narration, because I know the story front to back, I know the Chuck Jones animated version front to back, and I know the original book front to back, none of these things that they say are in it, and it just drilled into my brain every second. But what's so additionally infuriating about that is one of the few lines that they kept from the original work was, "The Grinch hated Christmas the whole Christmas season. Now, don't ask why, no one quite knows the reason." The reason that line is in the book is because it doesn't matter why the Grinch hates Christmas. It has no bearing on anything. And you even kept that line, yet you still gave him backstory and the reason that he hates Christmas. Oh, for God's sake. Now, as far as the Grinch himself goes, honestly, he's too nice. Not that he's a good guy, but he's just kind of cranky. He's just the grumpy neighbor who doesn't like going shopping during the holidays because he doesn't like the carols being blasted at him. That's who this Grinch is. It's not seeping into it. There's no sense that his heart is actually 2 sizes too small. He's just not into the forced joy of it. I think maybe part of the problem is there's an awful lot of Max in this movie, which is part of the reason my daughter likes it so much, because she loves dogs to death. So by bringing in more Max, that means they upped the Grinch's relationship with Max, and they gave him a very loving relationship with Max. And while that's kind of cute in and of itself, it's very undermining of the Grinch as a character, because he's not a mean one, this Mr. Grinch. And it's like, it was the weirdest thing that early on he has to go grocery shopping, and if you've seen the trailers, you've seen part of this, he goes shopping in Whoville. Am I the only one who feels like that's fundamentally wrong? The idea that he, at any point, the whole thing is, he stocked up for the winter so he wouldn't have to go down and shop during the holiday season. But, he's gone through the food faster than he expected, so he needs to go shopping there. Set aside the holiday context of that. Just the idea that the Grinch goes shopping in Whoville. That feels wrong. That feels really, really wrong to me. And look, I'm going to readily grant I'm possibly overly attached to the Chuck Jones animation, because I grew up on it. That's my childhood. That's my nostalgia. But I just think it's better on basically every level. Because what does this have going for it? Well, Benedict Cumberbatch's Grinch is not a particularly great Grinch. Honestly, even though I think overall this movie is better than live action, I think Jim Carrey's Grinch was better than Benedict Cumberbatch's Grinch. I do think this is the worst Grinch. So there's that. That doesn't help. But so since it doesn't have a great Grinch going for it, what does it have? It has some cute animals. Okay. Illumination's decent at that. And it's got some cartoon slapstick. Illumination's also decent at that. Are you better than Chuck Jones at that? No. No, you're not. Almost nobody is. So, yeah. I didn't want to see it. I wish I hadn't seen it. But again, like, if you're not me, if you're not my age, with my attachment to the ones I grew up on, maybe you won't hate this as much. I still think it's kind of pointless. Like, it just doesn't. It seems to get the overall story and point better than the live action one did. It doesn't seem to get the Grinch as a character very well, though. And you know, there's lots of isolated little things that are funny. It's not without decent moments. It's not without a few laughs. There's a thing with these carolers basically like stalking after the Grinch as he's going through the town streets. That's honestly kind of funny. There's a extended thing with a reindeer that has its moments that aren't bad. Max is cute. But overall, it's just, yeah. It probably comes in just behind Horton Hears a Who as being one of the least offensive of these adaptations. I mean, it's not the Lorax. That was legitimately offensive. But, you know, these aren't good. And they're never going to be good. The best they're going to be is fine. Because Dr. Seuss's stories don't work padded out to an hour and a half. They just don't. They're not built for that, and they don't survive the process you have to put them through in order to get that. And personally, for me, this movie's just more proof of that. So, Illumination's The Grinch. What did you think of it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. A whole bunch of stuff you can do down there because there's buttons and there's links, including one to the Patreon if you feel like supporting me that way. But if you don't sweat it because there's other links to check out as well. You don't even have to look at those either if you don't want to, because at the end of the day, you are the council. And I just run the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned.